Hello, today, not the sexiest subject, but we're talking about debt, death, and divorce. We have to bring it up again because I keep labouring on about the demographic that typically come under the auspice of the EU property solutions products, mainly negative equity. And in the vast majority of what we're saying today, we're looking at Spain and what happens there. Obviously, you've got You've got two jurisdictions, and therefore two types of legal application in terms of both subjects of divorce and death. I go on about debt because that is the mainstay of our business, but the issues arising from there compound, unfortunately, when you get into the other subjects of death, divorce, and in one instance, we've had a case where there were the three. And it becomes more and more awkward, more and more difficult because the Spanish take a different approach completely in this matter to the UK legal system. And I say, if you get all three, it compounds up. So it's vitally important to be aware of it. Hopefully, you're not going to suffer from either situation of debt or divorce in the immediate term. But if you have, or there's a fear of it, then this is for you. Again, I say it's the demographic. I'm a man of a certain age, so I can talk on this subject. And we're going to share a couple of case studies here in terms of some of the difficulties we face when there's been, unfortunately, a death involved whilst we're acting, or unfortunately somebody's lost a partner, a husband, a wife, and then also divorces, which is a nasty area to cover, especially when it's very, very acrimonious. And we're going to go through both. There is a third case study which actually saw the involvement of a executor or trustee of a will there, and it went pretty ugly for that person because they were trying to do the best thing, trying to hide the issue, and unfortunately it became exposed, and they were potentially personally liable. So as I say, this recording is mainly about our experiences in Spain. Cyprus is pretty similar, our other main market, in terms of how we conduct legal affairs. Obviously, it's a British Commonwealth country, associated strong links there, so it's pretty similar and a little bit more pragmatic. But the Spanish have their ways in many forms, and this one is not easy. We're very lucky that we do have the backdrop, and I often extol the virtues of our brilliant Spanish legal team, and we can literally talk any case through in a very pragmatic way. So we're looking at foreign debt primarily around those two scenarios that go with it, although that's not necessarily the full remit in terms of what we're saying today. I bang on about foreign debt because it still goes on. Unfortunately, we still have the scenario where we believe there are still about 64,000 troubled units in Spain bought at the time of the last crash. And our research shows, for instance, on the Polaris Gulf area, the sort of 8 resorts up there, there are still about 7,500 alone in that quite tight area. So we're able to talk about this with EU Property Solutions because we have incredible experience in this field. Our mothership, if you like, is Bell & Company. You're welcome to look at that if you need any more confirmation of what we're about. And I myself have been involved in the debt world, if you like, for over 35 years now. And we know every facet of debt. We know the legals. We don't know everything, we never do, but we always get pleasantly or sometimes unpleasantly surprised by developments in this field. But we have the characteristics, the traits, if you like, to be able to deal with things. We have the experience, which always helps. That's not everything, but it definitely helps. We have the technicals, which we know what can and can't be done. We understand, like no other firm I'd suggest, the cross-jurisdictional issues that arise. And we have an excellent team of advisors that we select in Spain and in Cyprus particularly, but in other European countries as well. Over and above that, we have the mindset to achieve, which is very, very important. Very often, even as some of our legal team say that can't be done, we will drive that to the nth to make sure it can be done. We're not stupid if it's totally impossible. If a house is being repossessed tomorrow, we're not going to be able to achieve anything there. But we will, as I say, push it to the nth, even with our own advisors. Most importantly, we have the stamina, because some of these cases are often laced with disappointment in terms of how long things take. The Spanish courts move at a pace which is nearly in reverse. It's very archaic, We're at the behest of judges, but we are there for the long run, no matter what. In terms of Bell and Company, that's the same scenario. We have cases that have taken 8 years to settle, but we're here for the long run. We have any number of cases were stuck in the last crash, and we just take that long view. We have the stamina to see things through to their ultimate conclusion, which is very important for clients. We're not, we tried, we failed. We whatever it takes, we will get there in the end if there is a positive outcome to be had. And we always do the very best for the client. That's our mantra, which sounds very corny. If we sort the client out, we're okay. That's what we've got to do. Even if it's worst case scenario, we still sort the client out. We're not looking at that instance here, but the client is first and foremost in our mind. Then ultimately we get rewarded if we take that approach. So we just want to get that across, and why I try not to go on about it too much, but it's very, very important that you get the mix of those 5 or 6 characteristics or traits, as I call them. The 3 Ds, as we often refer to them, the debt, divorce, and death, are an awful time for anybody. Debt is, as I said, is bad enough on its own. Compounded by the other 2, it just makes it really horrible for people that go through it. Very often people suffer with the consequences or the fear of debt. And then if we look at debt, for instance, particularly here, obviously that's the ultimate issue, be it some sort of form of terminal illness or ultimately a shock. Unfortunately, we had a client very recently who passed away after an aneurysm about a month or so ago, and the shock was obviously terrible for the family, the consequences and the fallout in every sense from that. And our job was to sit back, hold the position for our client, whilst a very litigious bank in Cyprus, in this instance, were making noises. We through our barrister, we got them to calm down. We didn't have to wait for people to heal a bit, to be ready to deal with it and get rid of it. It usually comes through that. Obviously, there's the grief side, and then we go to, but we do need to sort this out. So it's whenever the clients are ready to deal with it. They must, but whenever they're ready, we take a very empathetic approach. And if we have to fall out with any form of solicitors on the other side or a bank, we will do that just to make sure our client is protected. And I have gone on quite a bit recently. Again, maybe I'm reflecting on where I am in the life cycle, but it's time to sort out issues and problems. I've just gone through our finances, my wife Amanda and I, topping up the life policies, making sure we get everything where we're starting to get where it is. And if we have a problem in our finances, they have to be resolved now. We're fortunate enough, nothing's perfect, but we don't have any major issues in terms of where we are. But that said, if you have a property around, and a lot of people still hang out for it to ultimately come good, procrastination and time is not your friend. So it's a case of saying, bang the drum about this. If you've got a problem, let's deal with it. Let's get it over and done with and out the way, so that we can live the rest of our days in some sort of peace there. So that's very important. And I say it's not a great thing to discuss, but I say I'd like to think at 64 years of age, I am qualified to speak on this matter. And again, I will say it again, I implore people to tidy up their affairs now. It's so important, in terms of where life cycle is. Do not leave this to the next generation to mop up. We've had many an instance where that's been the case, and it's been pretty really painful and really difficult to sort out on the other side, as it were. So what I'm going to do is share a quick testimonial video here from a lady called Sue, which sort of gave it a backdrop, and hopefully sort of resonates with what I've said so far here, in that she had the loss of her husband and was in a bad place. She wasn't necessarily the lady that sorted out the household finances, and everything was an awful shock. To her credit, after a decent period of grief, she dealt with everything, and it's quite refreshing in terms of what she says here and how she did approach it. And it's unsolicited. No, sorry, it wasn't solicited. We did ask if she'd comment, and she bravely did. But it's meant from the heart, so hopefully you'll appreciate that. So here's Sue.
Hello, my name is Susan Geraghty, and in 2010, my husband and I completed on an apartment in Spain. It was at the pinnacle of the house property burst, and the apartment was valued at far less than we were paying. But we couldn't back out, as we'd already invested all of our savings into the deposit. Then in 2016, the worst thing in the world happened. My husband sadly passed away suddenly and unexpectedly. My world was shattered. We'd not made a will, and the next couple of years were extremely difficult for me. While grieving, I had to try to get the apartment into my sole name before I could do anything with it. Things were hard, a different language, and being so far away. And during this time, I retired, so no wages coming in. I hadn't been to the apartment for about a year when the COVID hit us all. That was the last straw for me. In July 2020, I was put in touch with EU Property Solutions, and to be honest, I cried on the phone when they explained what they could do for me. The whole process was smooth, and a lot of it happened throughout the lockdown in the UK. February 2021, everything was completed, and a huge weight has been lifted. I can now try to get on with my life, and I think that's what my husband would have wanted. Thank you, EU Property Solutions.
So yeah, hopefully that gives you the insight to the sort of work we do and how we approach things in that empathetic way. Sue had all the fears of the world, understandably, where she was so fragile after the sudden loss of her husband, and particularly Natalie in our Leeds office showed a brilliantly sort of humane, empathetic approach to the case and pushed it through. It wasn't easy, but we got it pushed through. Ultimately, took a considerable time to do, but again, like I say, we're not in for the quick, short-term fix here. These things take time, and we're here to see it right through. If death does occur, it's important to have a little bit of an idea of the context, because I'm not a big fan of solicitors full stop, but in the main I really don't like foreign solicitors, especially when they consider Johnny Foreigner, as I always call it. It's definitely that sort of scenario. So they are prone to BS. There are some nasty characters out there that will look to benefit and profit on the back of bad news like this, but it's not too difficult to deal with, but it has to be dealt with, and there is a process to it. If somebody passes away and they have any property in Spain, be it anything, but particularly in properties, if it's negative equity or positive equity, you've still got to apply for probate in Spain. So obviously that'll be the case in the UK as well. And weirdly, the Spanish granting of probate is now quicker than the UK system, which is absolutely fallen apart since the powers that be in the government entity, the revenue, whatever division it is that deals with probate, work from home. That's not a political statement or anything. That's a fact. It's gone to pot in the UK. But in Spain, our Spanish solicitor, who's based in Andalusia there, he has a very professional team that carried us through. If this was the case, Natalie and James, my son, who work in the Leeds office, they would deal with the case and make sure that goes through. There is an additional fee, unfortunately, on that, but it has to be done to make sure you can deal with this. But it's dealt with, and I keep using the word empathetic, but it's very important that it is on an empathetic basis. Everybody knows where they stand. I mentioned in a minute about the use of power of attorneys, because that takes away the need to be troubled by the minutiae of some of these cases. Obviously, you've got to grant a level of trust here, but we're here, we go nowhere. EU Property Solutions has been working for 10 years now, nearly. We're going nowhere. We're FC regulated, so not that guarantees anything, but the trust level is there. It's a way we do things. We have a number of instances. I'm going to give you a couple of case studies to sort of show the variety of some of the stuff that can happen here. And again, it's not the nicest subject in the world to deal with, but it has to be, because it's the backdrop here. Heaven forbid that one of us keels over, for want of a better word. So we had an instance where a lady passed away, and as part of our data analysis, we didn't know she passed away. We wrote on the basis that she had a charge on her home granted to a Spanish bank, and usually they're not good news. So we reached out to her. Her sister rang up and quite irate. We didn't know the particular lady had passed away, and she sort of tore a strip off whoever answered the phone, saying, "How dare you? My sister doesn't own a property in Spain." Unfortunately, she did, and she'd bought her something that was really poor value. It's down towards Manilva, down the other side of Estepona there, and she was the lady that died. Unfortunately, was ashamed of the fact that she basically lost about £200,000. She hadn't paid the mortgage. The bank had chased her in the UK and ultimately put a charge on the house. Once we sort of appeased the sister, who was also the executor, that was the situation. We went to work, reached out to the bank solicitors in the UK. We established that the property had been repossessed and that a shortfall of about 108,000 sterling arose, and they had a charge on the property that was now going to go into the estate. So we got to work there, and long story short, we settled it for about £20,000, including fees. Because we took a legal stance. We dealt with that directly here in the UK, and there was no need for us to have any Spanish legal input there. So that was that case. Then there was a case where, unfortunately, the case I think it's about 2 months ago now, I was referred to it, suddenly died of an aneurysm. It was very close to signing off a deal there with the bank, which saw a settlement. I think it was about 139,000 negative equity was getting settled again, around the £25,000 mark, including fees. And but the papers were prepared. It was dealt with under the power of attorney, because that was granted prior to the sad demise of this gentleman, and we managed to see that deal through. That was okay. Third instance, there was a case, I briefly mentioned it earlier, was when there was a trustee or executor on an estate, and they were aware of the Spanish property but decided to omit it from the probate application. So effectively, they were denying the existence of it, or ignoring it, or pushing it aside so it was out of the way. Now, as an executor, you have to obviously control the estate in every sense. You've got the assets and the liabilities, and the assets have to be realised in line with the wishes of the deceased, but you have to pay your bills. In this instance, there was a £142,000 shortfall, but they decided to ignore it. Ultimately, over time, the property was repossessed. It triggered this £142,000 bill, and then they looked to send this to recovery. They in turn contacted the widow. She contacted the executor. She advised the pursuing solicitors that the executor had dealt with this. So they in turn, which is their right, decided to pursue the executor personally, on a personal level, which is the exposure you have as an executive. If you don't deal with it correctly, you're potentially exposed here. So you got a bit ugly for a while between everybody, not us, but the two parties, the widow and the executor. And long story short, we settled on again around the £20,000 level on that amount of debt. But again, it was an instance where bad news was sort of swept under the carpet, and it wasn't the right way to go about things, and it's very difficult. Ultimately, all debts come around. The people anchor on the statute of limitations, and whatever suits their argument, whatever they find on Google, whatever they find on a forum, usually I'd say about 90% incorrect, but they anchor on something they think is right, and it's not. Things have to be dealt with properly. Everything will eventually bubble to the surface, and people will be pursued, whatever form that takes. So it's not making anything, not trying to over dramatize it, but that's what goes on. Loans get sold, things like this. I've gone on about this. I won't bore you with this, but it's very important. Again, please take the action if you've got some sort of issue with the finances, wherever they may be, or especially when it comes to the foreign property issues and mortgages. One thing I've been very remiss, and I didn't mention there, I have to mention it here, is that if somebody passes, that is the end of that mortgage. We had quite a difficult case though, where a gentleman passed away, I think it was about 8 years ago, and his wife just didn't know what to do. She didn't sort out the UK probate, she didn't sort out the Spanish probate and or this mortgage. She didn't pay this mortgage, and it was only when she got to a situation where the case got transferred from the bank chasing her and her departed husband in the UK. That was painful enough because the banks always continued to still write in the joint names. Doesn't matter what they do, they always do that. Never apologise. So she started to get the pressure there, but when they moved it to a firm in England, transferred the case across to a firm we deal with, she was obviously still hugely upset with her loss, which we got, but now she was fearful of what was going to happen because she hadn't, partly because of the fear thing, the grief thing, sorry, at the beginning, and then a bit of fear, and then it went away for a while, then it came back. She was absolutely frozen with fear. So we jumped in, made the explanation to them what had gone on. They weren't happy because you have to notify on the day of death, etc., because that's the end of the mortgage. Everything should be settled. The property has to go. The shortfall, the bit or the surplus goes to the estate. It's dealt with. If you've got the surplus, it can be distributed. If it's a shortfall, it's got to be paid in full. And again, that's an area of work we're pretty strong on there. So it's important to note contractually that's the end of the mortgage. So that's enough about death. Moving on. The other part that we're looking at in this brief webinar is that of divorce, which is horrendous when it comes to negative equity, foreign property issues, foreign jurisdictional issues, etc., etc. Because obviously you've got the two parties splitting. If very rarely they seem to be amicable, and I see that in the main stirred usually by the solicitors involved in divorces. And it gets nasty. There's raw emotions everywhere, and we come across some absolutely shocking cases where the vitriol, the hatred, and everything else clouds the mind. And in the main, the Spanish banks don't give a monkeys. They want their money. And then in nearly, I'd say, 80% of the divorce cases we deal with, they've been spun a web by their UK solicitor that the settlement is this, therefore it stands. And it doesn't. If the mortgage is joint, if both names are on it, it's joint. The fact that the solicitor has agreed, or the solicitors have agreed that he or she will deal with the negative equity issue, may be okay in their little court and what they deal in their definitive area of work, doesn't mean their decision and the agreement is definitive in law. It is in the family court, but bring it into the commercial world, it isn't. If you are joint on anything, joint and several, whatever form it takes, be it a personal guarantee, be it negative equity, a mortgage, it is. And they go, and solicitors tell their clients wrongly, show the bank the divorce settlement. They're not interested. You signed up in 2008, 2007, and said that I am joint on this mortgage. We are jointly buying this. That's a contract. It doesn't matter what happens down the track. It doesn't matter. And it's vitally important that people get that if they're a divorce, because again, it's almost like a flag inconvenience. He said, she said they were going to deal with it. Cool, they did. If their circumstances change, if their finances go to pot, if they remarry, if they move away, whatever, it's still joint and several. It doesn't matter what happens. We've had a number of settlements we've achieved, but I say they're always shocking cases. We had an instance where there was £74,000 shortfall, and the solicitor that dealt with the divorce actually made the case worse here in the UK because they laboured on the fact that they said, and they told their client, it doesn't matter what the Spanish banks or courts do, this divorce proceeding will stand. We've got an instance on the other side where somebody's ended up with some money from a sale, but he didn't tidy up the divorce settlement, where he was to benefit from Spanish property. So now his wife, and most likely ex-wife, will end up with half the property proceeds. If you don't deal with it and you don't deal with it right, and you have to cut through a lot of the BS that comes from our solicitor friends in terms of divorce and how it stands in the world, then you're in trouble. As this man is, he's going to lose a considerable sum of money, but we're still battling away with the courts there. I digress. Long story short, the husband in this instance couldn't meet the liability, so consequently the ex-wife, she was a lady of means. She stepped in. The 74,000 was being demanded from the two of them. He put his hands up. I cannot, and he couldn't. We went through the full scrutiny of that. Again, the banks didn't care. The solicitors going, this stands in any court in the world. No, it doesn't. The Spanish law is completely different. Long story short, again, we settled over time after lots of tears, lots of arguing, lots of rows, not with us, amongst one another, with their solicitors, etc. It was settled on 16,000. She paid it, and now she's pursuing the ex-husband, but that's difficult and another day's work. So there's that instance. Then you get situations where one of the husbands or wives, now separated, divorced, etc., go away. So we had a case where, again, the divorce settlement was there. They didn't conclude it. They left this bit open. In this instance, it was the wife. In this instance, she was due to pick up the negative equity property, but she didn't. She went away. I think the thing they knew about, she was in Indonesia, and whatever. She just completely changed her lifestyle, but could not be found, and it was very, very difficult because the bank, quite right, saying back on our 2006, whatever it was, mortgage, you were both on it. So if it's Mr. and Mrs. Smith, for instance, Mrs. Smith had gone away. She hadn't passed away, so there was no death certificate. You could say, well, she's gone, so we can deal with it here. They go, no, we need to speak to Mrs. Smith. No matter what the searches were, no matter what went on, this lady literally got off the face of the earth. So consequently, it was very, very difficult to sort this out. We had our solicitors, and it wasn't a legal process. Our solicitors had to basically force the bank to accept the situation, or face a long, protracted case of trying to repossess the property and then chase the debt. We were trying to find a way where we could get it back, and what we had to do in the end, the husband had to indemnify against the fact if the ex-wife came back and said she was due some of the money, which she wasn't. It was in negative equity, but the bank would not move on that. He had to, so he's indemnifying the chance that eventually the property would have gone into positive equity, which it was never going to do because it was a long way short. It's about, like I say, 74,000 short, and in poor form. So that makes it really difficult because obviously divorce comes, everyone separates, goes their own different way, do whatever they're going to do. This lady, whatever she did, went to find herself in Indonesia, and it took, I think, 2.5 years, that case, to eventually get the bank to do it. At one instance, there was an instance, I wasn't there, but I was told that the bank manager and the solicitor were pushing the keys across the desk. The bank manager was going, I can't take them. I said, well, there's nothing else we can do. You take them. There's nothing else you can do what you want. I'm leaving them there. It was a bit of a visual, not actually technically correct, but it shows that's where we got to. He said, right, okay, in the end, the husband had to indemnify the fact that she may ask for something back later or anything else. No chance of it. We did have one instance which brought all this together for the title of this brief webinar. And what happened there was there was a £174,000 debt. The husband, they separated, ultimately divorce settlement, decree absolute. Then he was away wherever he went. So he went away. The £174,000 came into play. He was supposed to deal with it, but he'd gone away. So that was bad enough. Okay, so then we couldn't find him. I can't remember where they thought he was, but they still couldn't find him. When we did find him, ultimately found out then that he died, which is terrible. But he died intestate, and he had assets. And this is where it's the compounding effect of these things, if they're not dealt with whilst they arise, that it gets very, very, very ugly. Right, a bit of too many verys there, but very, very, very ugly. And in this instance, we had to then assist the executor. So the husband and wife, she wanted, the wife wanted nothing to do with it. He was supposed to have dealt with it, etc. But she was still, obviously, because it was joint and several of the mortgage, it was a joint mortgage. They were sort of tied to the hip, if you like, in terms of that contractual obligation. But we had to go right the way back and say, right, we had to introduce ourselves to the ex-husband's family so that they could sort out the will and the probate. All the time, the bank going, we want 174,000. We found arguments, or our solicitor found arguments why that should not be. time was slightly on our friend to get a very good, intricate legal argument why it wouldn't stand. And again, we didn't actually. The costs were pretty brutal here. They were about £20,000 on their own because it took so much unravelling to get there. In the end, our solicitor, with the time and the comfort of time, if you like, was able to come up with a very intricate argument, which we then bounced off our excellent barrister based in Cordoba, and we got the deal. You have it back. Get lost. We're all away here. Go sort out the estate, and the estate paid the £20,000. Painful, very painful. Obviously, the death is there, but but again, it's one of those things where people didn't take action. They believed the divorce solicitor. Yeah, there's a place for the divorce solicitor, absolutely. I'm not a fan of solicitors, full stop, but they stoke the situation. They talk outside their brief, especially on cross-jurisdictional issues, especially on negative equity. They don't know how to deal with it, so it's beyond their brief. Now, this is a relatively short webinar because I don't want to go on wrong. It's not the nicest subject in the world, but it's almost like a little bit, if you like, an advertorial for us because it shows the depth that we can go to if we need to. And it does touch on the very raw subject, obviously, anybody's death. And also, if heaven forbid, you've got to go through some form of divorce. So I've kept it relatively short. It's not good. It's the basic story. So let's not get ourselves into a place where we have to be. And if you have the misfortune to be in either side of the divorce or death and you want free advice, you just reach out to us. Quickly, going to recap a couple of bits of advice. It's not easy. We get that. You face many pitfalls going through this process, especially when you've got the legals in Spain. Very often there's a lot of disappointment first, but be pragmatic. We quantify everything from the get-go, so everybody knows what they're in for. And if you have any questions from today's webinar here, just reach out to me. There'll be some contact details after this, and come back. If it's relatively simple, I'll give you the time to go through it, give you some advice. Should anybody come on as a client from this webinar, we offered a 15% off our fees, as long as it's within 7 days of the webinar. So that's us. I won't go on. Thank you for your time and have a good day. Thanks.